On my channel, I have covered some really gruesome murders and serial killers. For every such case, I think, nothing can be worse than this, and the next one proves me wrong each time. Today's video on Belarani Dutta murder case is a rare one for the primitive and savage nature of it. Also, this was probably the first case in India where the police had to rely on plastic surgery to identify the victim. One of the reasons why Belarani Dutta murder investigation still stands out in the history of criminal investigation in the country. It is impossible to imagine what kind of headspace one has to be in to do what this husband did to his wife and unborn child. Several times during the research, I told myself, I can't go on. I need to stop reading for my own peace of mind, sanity. But it pulled me back in each time. That is one of the reasons I started this channel, so I could give these stories a voice. There may be only one person watching these videos or 100, which isn't often. At the very least, these victims' stories are out there, reminding the listener that they once lived like you and me, and the ultimately tragic end they endured, more often than not, by the person closest to them. That monsters are real. They live among us. Also, it's not a given that the victims always get justice. Sometimes, justice is swift, but for others, it takes decades, or not at all. Enough of my ramblings. If you're still with me, let's get on with the video. A quick disclaimer before I continue. Photos and clips from the event were limited, so this video is me giving out a lot of details without much to show as such, so I hope you bear with me. January 1954. It was a crisp winter morning in the city of Kolkata. Like any other morning, people woke up to get ready for the day, carrying out their morning rituals. There were those who had to brave the cold morning breeze to do their job. Their livelihood depended upon it. Like that of street sweepers. They had to be up at the crack of dawn before the morning crowd descended upon the city and the streets got too busy. So they always started off early, picking up dirt and debris and unwanted litter from the streets of Kolkata, cleaning the sidewalks, parks, and areas around public toilets. On January 31st, 1954, one of the sweepers who was cleaning the area around the public toilet found 3 abandoned packets, all wrapped in newspaper and tied with a cord made of coconut fiber. Call it an occupational hazard, but sweepers and cleaners are used to the refuse around them. And this particular sweeper probably wouldn't have given it a second thought before dumping them in the bin. But experience had also taught him to spot something suspicious when he saw it. This time, even he wasn't sure what it was. When he examined them, he spotted what he thought was blood on one of the packages. Of course, he didn't waste any time before alerting his fellow workers, and in no time a crowd gathered around the area, curious to see what was in those abandoned packages. Someone in the crowd had alerted the police. By the time police arrived, they had to first clear the crowd before they got anywhere near the packages. When they opened the packages one by one, neither the police nor the crowd around were prepared for what was in them. 2 arms that went up to the elbow joint, palm, fingers, wrist, and forearm ending at the elbow. All of these had been chopped into pieces. The newspapers used were of November 21st edition of Jugantar, a local news daily. On the same day, in another part of city, the guard at the Kalighat Park had just finished his lunch. As was his custom, after lunch, he took a stroll around the trees looking for anything unusual, but not actually hoping to find any. He spotted 4 newspaper-wrapped packages tied with the coconut coil ropes, half hidden behind trunk of a mango tree. There were overgrown bushes around the tree, so he couldn't make out what it was exactly. Unlike his sweeper friend, he was not quick to recognize the suspicious nature of these abandoned objects. I don't know what he thought, but I can safely assume that chopped body parts were not at the top of his list. When he opened the packages to find exactly that, he went hysterical, screaming at the top of his lungs. That drew the attention of pedestrians walking by. Within a couple of minutes, nearly 100 people had gathered around the tree. Next couple of minutes could be triggering for some. So if you are still with me, consider this a trigger warning. In the first package, they found 2 legs from knee to the sole. Second one had a torso chopped into 3 portions. In the third, there was a severed head. with eyes gouged out, ears and lips torn off, facial skin peeled off. All of this had been done with an obvious intent to make the face unrecognizable. Only a few strands of hair were still stuck to the head. The fourth packet contained a full-grown, dead fetus. Officers from the Toligunj police station, who were there at the scene near the public toilet early in the morning, rushed to Kalighat Park. Considering the severity of the incident, officers from the homicide department of Lal Bazaar, headquarters of the Kolkata police, were called too. Just like the first scene, all 4 packets were made of Jugantar newspaper. The savagery of this act was so horrifying that everyone, from the crowd that had gathered to the police who were there, was shaken. No one had ever seen or heard anything like this before. The park was searched thoroughly. They found another packet which contained 2 portions of thighs, all chopped up. The newspaper that it was wrapped in was Jugantar again. It wasn't hard to figure out. All the packages came from the same source. After the body parts were retrieved, the police commissioner handed the case over to the detective department of the Kolkata police, a specialized section that had some of the best investigators in the country at the time. Samirendra Nath Ghosh was appointed as the lead investigator. Doctors conducting the post-mortem worked for hours trying to piece together some sort of semblance of a human body. Once they finished, it was a shape that resembled a female form. There were 2 identifying factors. 1, the woman's feet were unusually large. 2, there was a deep cut on her left thigh. Not a fresh cut, but one that had happened some time back and had healed, leaving a scar. They were also able to identify the cause of death. It was a wound to the neck by a sharp object, which was not self-inflicted. Most likely, someone stabbed her in the neck. There were other wounds on the body, but they were post-mortem injuries. With this information in hand, now they had to figure out who this woman was. If they were to find out who her killer was, they first had to establish her identity. But the most identifiable part of her face, was destroyed beyond recognition. In 1954, fingerprint and DNA technology was not as advanced or reliable. So they came up with an only solution that seemed feasible or doable. They got in touch with Dr. Murari Mohan Mukherjee, renowned plastic surgeon who headed the plastic surgery department of Kolkata's Karnani Hospital. He wasn't very optimistic in the beginning. It also was a huge responsibility. If they messed up, it would greatly diminish this woman's chance of ever getting justice. Dr. Mukherjee used all his expertise in reconstruction surgery on the face of this corpse to get a hint of her face before it had been disfigured. For the most part, he was successful. He was able to reconstruct a face out of a mutilated head. But as expected, decomposition had set in and critical changes were taking place in the remaining facial muscles and tissues. So the end result wasn't as precise as Dr. Mukherjee and the police would have wanted it to be. They had little choice but to publish the pictures of the face in newspapers, asking for the public's help in identifying her. They didn't get any response for weeks after. No one seemed to know the woman. No one was missing her. After waiting for 20 days, they had to make the decision to cremate the body. There was no way they could keep the body intact any longer. So, decision was made to preserve some DNA like a sample of hair and bones. Police were not giving up on her though. Hundreds of people who lived or had passed by the areas where the body parts had been disposed of were questioned. Information was sent out to police elsewhere in West Bengal to track down possible missing persons complaints. But there was no meaningful lead anywhere. As time passed, there was no lead in the case. Not a single clue had emerged from all their efforts. And there were other crimes still going on. That meant they couldn't use all the resources on this one case when there was no lead to work on. It almost looked like her fate would once again fail her. Lead investigator in the case, Samirendra Ghosh, was sure he would solve the case. They only needed a small thread of clue to start them off, and he was determined to keep looking for it. It is investigators like him who restore our faith in humanity. When the lead came, it was so subtle, he almost missed it. Almost. February 25th, 1955. Samarendra was returning from work. It was late evening. He was down with flu for the past couple of days, and on that evening he was feeling rather low. On his way home, he thought to stop and pick up some flu medicine. Since it was quite late, around 9:30 p.m., most pharmacies or medical stores, as they are known in India, were closed. He stopped on the road and went to the only open one near him. He thought it didn't look much like a pharmacy anymore. Maybe it once was. The night he went in, the shelves were bare and dusty. Person managing the store looked either tired or bored or maybe both. He didn't pay any attention to the approaching customer until he noticed the police uniform. Then suddenly his demeanor changed. But unfortunately for him, he couldn't change the stock or lack thereof in his store, even for a police officer. And he didn't have any flu medicine. After a long day, when medicine seemed the only way to get some much-needed rest, Officer Samarendra was beyond annoyed. Where he would have just left on a normal day, this day he wanted to know why this person had a medical store open if he couldn't even stock something as basic as a flu medicine. Shopkeeper had a ready answer. He was very sorry, but the owner of the shop had not been around this past month. He used to visit every day to do a stock check, order medicines that were low in stock or much in demand, made sure seasonal medicines were well stocked. This past month, though, he had not come by once, even after being contacted many times. Why was he absent? The man couldn't say. He only told the officer his owner's name, Belarani Dutta. In his annoyance, Officer Samarendra left the shop. He was almost home when it hit him like a ton of bricks. The owner was missing for the past month. What are the chances? His victim was technically missing for the past month too. He couldn't shake this feeling he had, like he was walking away from something important. Investigator in him couldn't let this chance pass. At that time, it didn't matter that he was tired or he had flu or this may not even be related, but he wanted to take his chances. He asked his driver to turn the car around. He went back to the store to get the owner's home address. Once he had it, next stop was Belarani Dutta's house. Unfortunately, house was locked and there was no sign of life. Fortunately for him, the neighbor was eager to share any information he could. Belarani Dutta had lived in this address with his wife Bela and his 6-year-old son since many years. A heavily pregnant Bela had been taken to Shishu Mangal Hospital at the end of January. They had not seen her go, but Belarani had told them. But the neighbors had neither seen him nor his son since January 30th. It didn't take more than half an hour to confirm that no one by the name of Bela Dutta had been admitted to Shishu Mangal Hospital in the past month. The mystery was finally beginning to unravel. Once they had a name, it was not difficult to get more information on Belarani. Also, the neighbors had described him in great detail. As only neighbors do, they also had their own suspicion. Within the next 24 hours, every possible detail about Belarani Dutta's life was in front of the police. Apparently, Belarani Dutta had another residence not too far from where he lived with Bela. His official residence, which was also on his business records. Police kept watch on his second home. In the early hours of February 27th, a man was seen emerging from the house, his face covered with a scarf. He was stopped by the undercover police officer. They didn't give him time to think. They immediately rained questions on him. What was his name? Was he Bela's husband? Where was she? Where he would have lied given time to think, he had none. So he answered in the affirmative for the first couple of questions, but wised up quickly, and when asked about his wife's whereabouts, he told them she had run off with her lover. That answer sounded rehearsed to the trained police officers, like he had practiced this answer before, just in case anyone asked. Also, they had the benefit of knowing the truth already. They already knew heavily pregnant Bela had not run away, but was chopped up to pieces and thrown away like garbage around the city. Belarani was also unaware of his helpful neighbor's conversation with the police. So when asked to get into the back of the police car, Belarani didn't have much of a choice. At the time of his arrest, Belarani Dutta was 34 years old. Came from a village near Kolkata. His father was a policeman in West Bengal Police Department, but tragically passed away when Belarani was still a boy. His mother passed soon after. His 2 older sisters were married, and he lived with his grandmother till he was 8. Later, he moved to Kolkata for studies, but he was a poor student, didn't amount to much in studies. He also developed drinking and smoking at a very young age. When he failed his classes, his cousins who had paid for his education were furious. He left their home in a huff and moved in with his older sister. Her husband owned a pharmacy and Biren became their errand boy. Before you think, oh, poor boy, his childhood trauma must be why he did what he did, his family never mistreated him. His cousins and his sisters and their husbands cared for Biren, or Bichu as they affectionately called him. Biren's brother-in-law, in hopes of setting up a future for him, bought and gifted a medical shop to Biren. He even went as far as to transfer all the legal documents in Biren's name. That is how Biren Datta came to be the owner of his own pharmacy. Until he established himself, his cousin, who had paid for his education, let him live with them. When in their home, he developed a tender for his cousin's 17-year-old daughter. But his family was appalled. It was incestuous, all kinds of forbidden. They would never agree to it, and they didn't. So Biren and Kamala did what most star-crossed lovers do. They eloped, rented a room in another part of town and started to live together. His cousin, Kamala's father, made repeated attempts to separate the two. Nothing worked. It only caused more heartache for the cousin who had looked after Biren like his own brother. So he decided to withdraw and leave the couple alone, to come to their senses on their own. Exactly what Biren wanted. Separating Kamala from her father and family so they had no influence on her. Biren and Kamala started their new life. He suggested they change her name to Belarani, Bela for short. She agreed. She wanted to get married, make their union legal. He was not so easily tamed. He didn't care for the certificate. And I also think the effort he had to go to get one was too much for him. So he agreed to do a religious ritual, just the two of them, and called it a marriage in front of God. And that was that. Something to note here, as Bela was 17 at the time. Very young and not very wise, I imagine. She was also blinded by her love for Biren. He had promised her the world and she believed him. Biren himself was 24 or 25, experienced beyond his years in all the wrong things. They told the neighbors they were husband and wife and had their first son 2 years later. After his birth, they moved to their current location and lived there ever since. Even as they settled into their new home and life with the child, Biren and Bela's relationship had started to crumble. There is no indication to suggest that Biren had left his old habits behind. He did continue his drinking and womanizing. One day he met a girl, Meera, and started a relationship with her. This time he was generous enough to make the marriage legal. He married Meera in the presence of her family, who were completely in the dark about his first wife and child. The only people who knew about the existence of two women in Biren's life were his sisters and brothers-in-law. They had never quite accepted Biren's marriage with Bela, and therefore gave reluctant support to his marriage with Meera. Their hope was Biren's marriage with Meera would eventually lead Biren and Bela to separate. It is sad to think that they didn't give a second thought to what it would do to both these women when they found out. Meera had the legal marriage on her side, but Bela was utterly at Biren's mercy. And what of his son? What would happen to him? They were hoping two wrongs would make a right. For the next few years, Biren managed the double life. He also had a child with Meera and rented a small room for their family, not too far from his first family. Both women in his life were blissfully unaware of each other. He told lies upon lies to them both. Had it not been for the lack of funds, he would have continued for who knows how long. He was also an amateur actor and tried his luck in several Bengali films in small bit roles. That took up much of his time. His newfound interest in movies didn't fetch him much money. At the same time, he started to neglect his main business, his pharmacy. That dried up all his savings. On top of that, taking care of two families was too much. When Bela told him she was pregnant again, he lost his mind. Couldn't possibly look after another child. So the only way was to get rid of them both. So came out the whole story that day in the interrogation room. He was tired of double life. To make matters worse, both the ladies were now asking questions. Why was he away from home so much? If business was going well, why then they never had enough money? Why did he spend so many nights away? He had no answer to any of their questions. So he decided he had to kill Bela before the baby was born. But first, he had to make sure his 6-year-old son with Bela had a home after he finished with Bela and the unborn child. He made up a sob story and told Meera, his legal wife, that his friend had died leaving a 6-year-old child with nowhere to go. So if she didn't mind, they could adopt the child. Meera was a soft-hearted woman, so of course she agreed. She was too concerned about the poor child to ask any questions. Once that was sorted, he came home to Bela one night. Once they had had their dinner, he picked up a fight with her. He told her he believed she had cheated on him, which he knew wasn't true. And the child wasn't his. It was his. She was understandably upset. When she fought back, he took his chance and picked the knife from kitchen and stabbed her in the neck. Even though she was gravely injured, it was not enough to kill her, so he kept striking. As her lifeless body slumped to the ground, he emptied a cupboard and put her body inside. Then he cleaned up, took off all the gold jewelry from her body, and went to bed. The following morning, January 28th, Biren began to execute the plan to dispose of Bela's corpse. He told the neighbors Bela had to be admitted to the hospital in the middle of the night. Then he went to his medical store and collected Jugantar newspapers stacked in his shop, came home and went to work on the body. He talked in detail about how he dismembered the body, what he did to her face, and how he had to clean up after the carnage to the investigators. It doesn't make for a pleasant hearing or reading for that matter, so I will spare you the details. Once the deed was done, he went to sleep again in the same house. Next day, after spending the whole day in pharmacy, he decided to dispose the body parts that evening. Hired a rickshaw and threw the packages where they were later found. Went back home and cleaned the whole room again. He said he had missed few spots where blood had splattered, and this time he cleaned up those as well. He told the concerned neighbors that she was still in the hospital and had not delivered yet. And this time he took all of Bela's jewelry and her son with him home to Meera. Meera welcomed the boy with open arms, and the gold jewelry was an added bonus. He quietly disposed of all of Bela's belongings one by one. Soon enough, the rented place was empty of any traces of Bela. He had given police a lot of details during the whole interrogation, and they assembled witnesses and proofs with a lot of care. Bela's jewelry was recovered from Meera soon after, and the murder weapon was seized. There were strands of Bela's hair stuck to the murder weapon and the bleach container he had used to clean up after. Dry stains of blood samples were collected from the floor. Forensic report confirmed these as human blood. It also confirmed that the hair on the murder weapon and those on the bleach container belonged to the same person. Bela's medical report and that of their joint residential address went a long way to prove that they lived together. Also, the Jugantar newspaper he had borrowed from his pharmacy was in evidence. Victims' relatives were contacted, and when they arrived, they couldn't believe what had happened to their little girl. Another strange thing was, all of her immediate family had one thing in common: unusually large feet. This went a long way to establish the victim's identity as Belarani, or Kamala as she was known to her family. Since the DNA technology was not what it is now, they had to gather a lot of evidence and proof to establish her identity beyond the point of doubt. Final proof of identification came from Bela's mother. If you remember, there was a deep cut mark on the left thigh of the murdered woman's body. Looking at the photograph of thigh shown to her by the investigators, Bela's mother was in tears. She recalled that her little Kamala had hurt herself when she was 8 years old, and the injury had left a permanent mark on her thigh. When the trial started, the defense team tried to discredit all the evidence that the deceased was not Belarani at all. They also tried to suggest she had run away with her lover, though there was no evidence to prove such a thing. When the verdict came, it wasn't what anyone was expecting. Biren Dutta was to be hanged till death. Kolkata High Court, then the Supreme Court, gave the same verdict. Biren Dutta was hanged on the morning of January 28, 1956, for the murder of Belarani, aka Kamala. After spending hours on this case, this verdict gave a sense of relief I didn't know I needed. Finally, a case where justice was carried out swiftly. Bela left her family and all she knew to start a new life with the man she loved. For him, Bela and her unborn child were just an inconvenience he wanted to get rid of. They didn't fit in with his plans anymore. That is not to say that he loved his other wife, Meera, more. It is just that Bela was alone in this world but for him, being estranged from her family, so easier to eliminate. Though this case is decades old and he may be well into his 70s now, my heart goes out to Bela's son. I hope he had a good life. That brings an end to today's video. If you made it to the end with me, bravo. Please spend a few seconds to subscribe, like and share. It will help me out tremendously. Thank you for watching. Until next time.